All right, Yield Nerds, episode 145. While the rest of the world was riding up and down on what was definitely a rocky week in the markets, I had this really gentle giant squeeze dollar bills into my bank account in the form of a short squeeze. And I'll explain to you how I lucked into that. And me being me, I thought I would create a process to identify how to stand in line for other gentle giants that squeeze money into your bank account or into my bank account from short squeezes. Doesn't mean it's going to work for me again. Definitely doesn't mean it's going to work for you. But let's get started. Well, we are up to, I think we're crossing already 400 subscribers. So thank you so much. I feel very honored that I have that support from you. If you are new to the show, please make sure you use the yield and income investing roadmap that starts from a beginner level and moves on. And most importantly, I say this in every episode, probably more than once. I do not have any magical powers. Don't trust what you hear. Do your own homework. Well, the agenda here, and as I, bench press and take the giant bottle of money and squeeze it right into my bank account, is to first do a temperature in the market, as we always do. I'll compare my performance with the markets, and then we'll understand what a short squeeze is, how does it work, and I'll tell you my experience with it by accident, of course, and my 3 month plan of how I anticipate the markets to go, and I'll share my trades. Well, I need to reiterate that I am not a wealth management advisor and this is not tax advice. I certainly am not asking you to buy or sell anything. This is my education that I'm sharing. Well, as you can see, the blue line is my portfolio. It's kind of bending downwards. But hey, in the last month, I had an 8.56% return in my equities alone, and I'm happy about that. The rest of the market is plunging down, including today. And, arguments are that fiscal discipline is finally biting us, inflation is not going away, our spending is out of control. And to all of that, I say, and you learned that this week, and you didn't know that last week. So, for people who bought high yield bonds, for people who bought poor credit rating instruments, for people who invested in companies with very high leverage, apparently you just realized these are risky. That's how I see it. Now, my portfolio itself does have a dramatic change. And, you may remember I used to be at a meager 0.5% in May of this year. I roared into 3.17% right on the election day, and I had a very nice boost from that increase. I have rolled back, and I'll tell you what I kept and what I actually bought and what I sold momentarily. If you're new, you will know that the way I beat the markets is by taking less risk, not more. And by that I mean I'm mostly in treasuries, a couple of long-term investment grade bonds. Outside of that, I'm in very short duration. I have zero, well, technically I have 0.2%, but I have a very small allocation to high credit, but everything else is on T-bills and U.S. Treasuries and so on, agency bonds. And so my duration as well has a very specific pattern. I kind of stay on the very, very short end. So if the market has any calamity, I dip in and take advantage of that. And so I would call my portfolio a rolling short-term fixed income portfolio that suddenly sweeps in. It goes from 0.5% to 3%, as you saw. It sweeps in to take advantage of equity trends when I believe, based on my education, there is an advantage, and then I go hiding. My entire portfolio, this includes both equities and fixed income, and substantial portion is fixed income, still went up in the last month and a half, while the rest of the market in fixed income went down. So I'm up almost 1%. If you look at the entire year, as you can see, I don't have these massive ups and downs that the market has. The blue line is me. I just keep chugging. And you can see this very nice upward incline, and that's because right before the election, I came in, saw an equity opportunity, and put 2-3% in it. That went up by 22%. And then I said, okay, I'm gone. And I'll explain what I mean by that. What this enables me to do is sleep well and make 5.3% state tax free for the most part. And so while I was doing all of that, turns out I also was in the middle of a short squeeze where money was squeezed into my bank account. What a wonderful experience. Now, what is a short squeeze? A short squeeze is one where people think a certain equity is overvalued. If you were to have Googled this company, it would say, hey, there is a company that is significantly overvalued, and that company happened to be Rocket Lab, RKLB. I actually reviewed this company before in one of our episodes. I'll post the link to that episode. And I also bought it when it was at a much lower price. And I did not hold it, and I sold it. And just last week, as I started getting out of some of these other equities like comfort systems, like many of these where some of the viewers of this channel said, hey, by now the PE ratio is 40. What the hell are you doing? So thank you for the wake up call in the comments. I got out of a lot of those equities, kept the profits, and I thought, okay, well, maybe I'll park a little bit of money in some new stocks. And I did not read articles that said, oh my God, Rocket Lab sucks. But I did buy Rocket Lab thinking I'll hold it for a long time. I don't know, maybe I'll pick up 5 or 10%. Well, surprise, surprise, there are people who play in the options game. I do not own options. I don't short a stock. I don't do any of that. I only own long positions. And so there was a large body of people who thought Rocket Lab is overvalued. So they bought options wherein if the stock were to crash, they would make a lot of money. So you just pay 50 cents or 70 cents for the right to sell stock at a certain price or the right to buy stock at a certain price and sell it at market value. So in this scenario, if the market thought it's only worth $9, but it is trading at $17 for a mere lottery ticket of 50 cents, you get to later on cash in your chips for $17 even though it only trades at 9. So that's an $8 pickup for a 50-cent investment, and that's the gamble people were doing. Well, all of that sounds good until you realize instead of the price going down, if the price were to go up, then you need to not only pay the 50 cents for the lottery ticket, you also have to pay the new price. So instead of $17, if it traded at $18, you now owe the bettor $1 for the difference between 17 and 18 and the 50 cents, which is the lottery ticket price. Well, here is how nutty it is. Almost 20% of Rocket Lab's shares were owned by these people playing the game that I think Rocket Lab is going to crash and burn. I'll pay 50 cents for it, and they're going to go down from whatever number, 15 bucks, 16 bucks, they're going to go down to $9, and I will cash in my chips and make a lot of money. I did not know that, quite frankly. I thought Rocket Lab was a good company. Their 10Q said they are not even sensitive to inflation. They service the government of Canada, the government of New Zealand. They service a lot of friends. And so I bought it, lo and behold, 2 days before their earnings, and I bought it in several tranches. So here is, I'm showing you a section of the trades, roughly $5,000 worth Rocket Lab stock that I bought at 15 bucks. And as you can see, the stock is crashing. And I said, oh, I'll pick up a few more. So by the time all of this is over, I've bought about $5,000 worth of Rocket Lab stock at give or take $15 a share. Well, surprise, surprise. Rocket Lab absolutely crushes earnings. Remember, inflation does not affect Rocket Lab's earnings. Because if Canada needs a rocket launched, or if New Zealand needs a rocket launch, they're going to do it anyway and not say inflation went up, so we don't need communication satellites. And that put the stock in a pickle. Here is the pickle. Instead of the stock price going down from $17, it went up to 21 and 22 and so on. Now the short sellers have a problem. Not only did they lose their 50 cents, they have to come up with another $5 to buy that stock. And the reason they would do that is if they don't come up with $4 and buy the stock when it is 19 bucks, they have to come up with $5 when the stock is 20 bucks. $6 when the stock is 21 bucks and they have to cover their position. So the longer you hold, the more money the short seller is out. And, I happen to be on the other end of this. And so I sold all of my holdings of Rocket Lab that I purchased for 15 bucks at $21. There were other trades I made. I'm showing you a section of the Rocket Lab trades. And so this netted me approximately 40% returns for the couple of days. And before I call myself a genius and say, this is how I do it, I'm going to rinse and repeat everywhere. I did sell at $21. You can see 21.85 is the peak. Everybody else had the same idea and they said, woohoo, I made 40% in 2 days. I don't want to own Rocket Lab anymore. And as you can see, the market didn't want to hold it at 21 and it has been crashing slowly every day. I still think Rocket Lab is a wonderful company, but I'm not inclined to go back and buy it now. I'm going to wait and watch it from a distance and see if it comes all the way back to 14, 15 bucks. And I probably will own it again. I just don't want to do the hype chasing. That's just not my instinct. But 40% returns for 2 days, I was very happy to take it. So here is the crazy, unlikely spirit partner. If you have been following my show, I'm about as low risk as possible, 98.5% in fixed income right now. Turns out I and Kathy Wood. Kathy Wood is one of the high risk traders in the market. Turns out she and I had the same idea. Kathy Wood had a bunch of money betting Rocket Lab would go up, and Kathy Wood cashed out on the same day, except Miss Wood, you made 28%, I made 42%. So never thought I would say I and Kathy Wood had thought about the same thing on the same day, but it apparently worked out that way. Me being me, I said, hey, this is pretty good. If 5,000 became 7,000, I wonder if I can scrounge around more of these kinds of deals. And so I wrote a little screener on Schwab, which I'm happy to share with you. I'm going to keep only within the US. I don't trust the short markets worldwide. And I want high volume. The reason you want high volume is so you can then sell your shares at that $21 and there are enough buyers. And then I said, give me shares that have very high short interest, and I will make the decision of whether I think it's a solid company. And oh, by the way, I'm still a yield nerd. I'm not going to overpay. I want the PE ratio less than 30. I also don't want to overpay for cash flow. And I want them to be a profitable company. And I don't want them to have any debt. The reason I add those filters is so if I am wrong, which happens, quite often, if I'm wrong and the stock crashes, at least I'm holding on to something that isn't about to die. It's a company that's profitable, that doesn't have debt, and okay, they missed this one quarter's earnings, but I can trust them. So I thought if I could find something like this, where the earnings are coming out in short order. The reason I want the earnings to come out in short order is so there is a likelihood of a short squeeze. And I thought, let me see if I can rinse and repeat it. And turns out there are three companies whose earnings are coming out in short order that don't have a lot of debt, that have high volume, that are profitable. And I was very interested in each of these three. And I went back and read their 10Qs and 10Ks. And my humble opinion, and please do your own research, Build a Bear Workshop, the odds that they are going to crush their earnings, I'm not too excited about those odds. Williams Sonoma, they own Pottery Barn. They sell $2,000 couches, which, my wife, I'm sure, loves Pottery Barn. I don't want to say anything about $2,000 couches. But, I go to Costco and I eat fast food. The $2,000, love seat is not my jam. I research their sales teams, and Williams Sonoma does not talk to me as a company that is going to suddenly crush earnings and beat expectations and trigger a short squeeze. Signet Jewelers is an incredible company. They own a lot of jewelry and they are in many different markets. But if you read their quarterly reports, their own CEO says we own too many brands. So, you go to K Jewelers and then you go to a different jeweler and a third jeweler. They own something like 11 jewelry store brands. And you think you're going into your own niche store, and it turns out they're all owned by Signet anyway. And so they say we are advertising online And our own brands are competing against each other, which is terrible, but that is what is happening. And so when I read their report, it didn't jump out at me as a company that is suddenly going to deliver and exceed their promises. And so I passed on all three of them. But if you were to run a filter like this, and if it talks to you, these are companies that are unlikely to go bankrupt because they have very low debt. You can see their debt to equity ratio is zero. So they have no debt on the books. The question really is, will you hold it for 2 years, 3 years? And if you think you want to own Build-A-Bear Workshop or the $2,000 Love Seat or Signet Jewelers, you do you. Those companies do have a lot of short interest. There may be a short squeeze. You may be at the right place at the right time. So then I thought, gee, I wonder if I were to be a little more reckless and say, I don't need for it to be a profitable company. And I would never do that. I'm just telling you, if I were to have done that, and I were to say, and also, it's okay if the revenue is not growing. It's okay if the price to cash flow ratio is awful, and it's okay if the price to earnings ratio is awful. I would never buy companies that come up on this list, but not in the prior list, but I'm just giving you an example. If I were to say I only want to gamble on short squeezes, then I would take out all the financial guardrails and say, just tell me who has a lot of short interest and has revenue coming up. Then I get a list of 9 companies. Since I had nothing better to do, I researched every one of the 9. You can see that all of them have no debt, and their earnings are coming out in the next 7 days. And lo and behold, Williams Sonoma is right there. And I researched every one of these companies, and there was one that kind of stuck out to me. Powell Industries, POWL, if you were to look at their trajectory, they have done incredibly well. Their revenue is a straight line up, their cash flow is up, their stock price is up, just absolute storybook. And the target for their next quarter revenue is also not a big lift. And so I read that and I thought, wow, they may surprise the short sellers because there is a lot of short interest and they probably could smoke their earnings. And I started researching them more, and you can see how their stock price went up like the rest of the market, but it is fast crashing down. And I wonder why that is happening. And if you look at the volume, you can also see that, and this doesn't show the volume, there's a lot of volume once the price reached the current amounts, the 280s. And so I was like, well, who is dumping stock? Well, turns out Mr. Thomas Powell of Powell Industries, hey, I'm a capitalist. I'm so happy for Mr. Powell. He founded the company. It trades in the public market. So good for you, Mr. Powell. But Mr. Powell is preparing for a $20 million Christmas. I hope he has a fun holiday with all of his family. But he is selling $20 million of his shares, and that is why the price is crashing. But if Mr. Powell thinks 280 is a very nice, healthy price to sell his shares, I'm probably not going to buy it at this price. So I'll just sit and wait and see what happens to Powell. But this is the way to think about a short sale. You would first make sure, or I would first make sure, that it is a company at a fair price. It is a company that I think will beat earnings. It is a company that I think I would own for 3, 6, 9 months, more than that, 2 years. And if the rest of the world doesn't believe in it and there is a lot of short interest, you earn yourself the right, in my opinion, to then go buy a Rocket Lab and say, I think it's a good company. Their 10Qs, assuming management is honest, says that they are not sensitive to inflation. And if you're so lucky, you get to own that company through a short squeeze. In the meanwhile, I have my bucket of eggs, obviously made by Calmaine Eggs. I am under a limestone quarry and I'm surrounded by a bunch of fighters. And what I mean by that is my 3-month plan. So here is my 3-month plan. Remember, I have a different economic situation and the gray hair to prove it. A 5.5% return after tax, which is more like 5.8% in Illinois with 6% state tax. With a 5.5 return after tax, it pays my bills. And if that is the scenario, would I take risk to try and get to 10% with a larger percentage of my portfolio? Not me. You do you. And so given that scenario, I also am not feeling really good about world peace lately. And so the next 3 months, who knows how it is going to go. But if my expenses are covered, I get to do the fun stuff, the YouTube episodes about, hey, I bought this and got lucky. Aside from that, I have no interest in increasing my equity allocation. And luckily, the market is, proving out my fear as well. And so I have crawled out of my 3% equity allocation back to 1.5 something percent. Chairman Powell comes out the next day and says, we are in no hurry to drop rates. Thank you, Chairman Powell. I'll continue enjoying the 5+% returns. There is spending challenges, there is inflation. So if there is another asymmetry, I'll probably go back from the 1.5% to something north. In the meanwhile, I have taken a very different angle with my eggs and my limestone and my military, and this is a drastic change. I sold all of my storm recovery stocks because they had appreciated an insane amount. And thank you for the listeners of Yield Nerd to say, hey, are you sure that these stocks even align with your philosophy? I cannot understand Calmain Foods. It only goes up. Thank you, Calmain Foods. I'm counting on you. And I have now squarely gotten into a whole bunch of military stocks, except one in the world of medicine. I used to own ELTP. I sold it and I'm now back into it. They just beat their earnings as well, but I wasn't that lucky. It's up 12%, but I bought it a little high. So having said that, I am into USLM, Calmain Foods, and a bunch of military stocks, but I'm just going to sit tight and wait for the market to tell me there is asymmetry again. Remember, I also buy fixed income practically every week, and there I have a barbell. I continue to buy on the very, very long end, and I'm comfortable holding these until maturity. I'm not buying it to trade. I'm buying it because they now pay 5.3, 5.4% pre-tax, which means even after tax, it's 5% for the next 20 years. I'm good with 5% for the next 20 years after tax. And I also buy in the very short end, which is the 2 months. So I have a fixed income barbell, which gives me income that I'm very comfortable with. I've gone out of equities. And as far as military stocks, yes, the stocks that you saw before, that is all I owned right now. And I'm waiting to see what happens next week. Thank you for watching Yield Nerd.